Bob Ross was the soothing voice behind thousands of painted music, trees, rivers, and joyful little clouds, as well as millions of serene afternoons, quiet words, and kind smiles. He was the one who, in the eyes of the world, made music feel secure. The majority of admirers were little aware of the private lives that lay beneath the calming TV persona. Bob did not stop working. During his lifetime, he produced more paintings than most painters could ever produce. But the narrative, music, continued after his death. His identity, his artwork, and his legacy were all entangled in a protracted and intricate battle. Years went by, questions remained unanswered, and interest waned until all of that mystery suddenly returned to the forefront at a calm moment. Follow Bob Ross's life, career, and legacy battle, which continues to leave admirers with unanswered questions. Born in Daytona Beach, Florida, and brought up in Orlando by working-class parents, Bob Ross has a soft spot for animals. Ollie Ross, his mother, was a waitress, and Jack Ross, his father, was a carpenter. Bob's interest for assisting animals was evident from a young age. He frequently tended to injured wildlife as a teenager, including snakes, armadillos, squirrels, and even, alligators. He eventually used one of those rescued squirrels as a silent representation of the peaceful life he cherished in a number of his TV show episodes. Additionally, Bob addressed Jim, his half-brother, in passing during the show. He never felt that going to school was the correct choice. After leaving in the 9th grade, he started working as a carpenter with his father. Bob lost a portion of his left index finger in a work-related mishap. Later in life, he was able to grasp a paint palette correctly in spite of this impediment. In 1961, Bob enlisted in the U.S. Air Force at the age of 18 and received training as a medical records technician. He became a master sergeant after rising through the ranks, and he was the first sergeant of the clinic at Alaska's Eileen Air Force Base. The first time Bob saw the snowy mountains and vast wilderness for music was in Alaska. These serene settings stuck with him and eventually became some of his most popular subjects. During his short vacations from the military, Bob painted and developed his speed. His personality was also molded by the military in ways that he subsequently wished to abandon. He once characterized himself as the person who screams at you for being late to work, makes you make your bed, and makes you scrub the latrine. As his years of service came to a conclusion, Bob made a decision for himself. He made the decision that after leaving the service, he would never again raise his voice. The world would soon come to know such promise as a component of the soft-spoken style. But Bob was still a long way from becoming the painter that millions would eventually recognize. Learning about painting and the wet-on-wet technique. Bob enrolled in an art class at the Anchorage USO Club while serving in Alaska. He soon became interested in painting, although not all of his teachers shared his enthusiasm. Bob became dissatisfied as a lot of people concentrated on abstract styles. He wanted specific methods, not theory, and he later clarified, they'd tell you what makes a tree, but they wouldn't tell you how to paint a tree. Bob was a part-time bartender when he came upon the German artist Bill Alexander's television program, The Magic of Oil Painting. Alexander completed entire paintings in just 30 minutes by using a centuries-old technique known as wet-on-wet, or a la prima. Bob thoroughly researched the method and learned how to do it on his own. He started making novelty gold mining pans with Alaskan-inspired scenery, which he then marketed to visitors. The paintings unexpectedly gained enormous popularity. Bob quickly discovered that his income from art was greater than that from the Air Force. He left the military in 1981 as a master sergeant to devote himself entirely to painting. Bob joined the Alexander Magic Art Supplies Company and continued his education with Bill Alexander after moving back to Florida. He taught novices all over the nation while working as a traveling salesman and tutor. Annette Kowalski attended one Clearwater session and observed right once Bob's innate ability to connect with people. She supported him in forging his own route since she thought he could become successful on his own. His business was founded by Bob, his wife, Annette, and her husband Walt pooling their funds. Financially, the early days were challenging. Even Bob's curly hair was an attempt to minimize costs when regular haircuts proved too expensive. Later on, he acknowledged, that he didn't enjoy the hairdo, but he retained it because it was part of the company's logo. A taped version, music, of Bob's art class was broadcast as a pilot program on a local Virginia station in 1982. Everyone was caught off guard by the answer. 60 PBS stations nationwide agreed to air the program in less than a year. Bob was brought to Muni, Indiana, in 1983 by the PBS station WIPB, which offered him creative flexibility to advance the series. Bob accepted because he felt a deep connection with the personnel. Despite returning to Florida in 1989, he kept going to Muni every 3 months to record episodes. A practice that aided in the development of what was rapidly gaining national attention. Painting becomes enjoyable. Officially, the joy of painting ran from January 11, 1983, until May 17, 1994. In subsequent years, it was repeated on television in a number of other networks and nations. The format of each half-hour show was the same, tranquil. Without drawing, Bob created whole scenarios on the canvas while demonstrating the wet-on-wet oil painting, music, technique. Initially, he worked in real time using his imagination. Viewers watched as he used a small paint palette to describe each phase in straightforward steps. His steady pacing and soft voice seemed to be just as significant as the paintings. Later on, art critic Mara Shore made a comparison between Bob and Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, pointing out that both had relaxed speaking patterns and soft voices. For the show, Bob was never paid directly by PBS Music. Rather, the program's art supplies, videotapes, and how-to music books provided all of the revenue. With the assistance of Annette and Walt Kowalski, Bob leveraged the success of the show to build Bob Ross Incorporated into a company worth $15 million. Other artists who had been trained in Bob's techniques also taught seminars when the company grew beyond Bob himself. Bob, however, never let business take the place of his morals. He kept filming the local fauna, particularly squirrels. He frequently took in and cared for animals that were hurt or abandoned. His main emphasis remained painting. Few painters ever create as many paintings as Bob did, with an estimated 30,000 completed over his career. Even with that enormous production, authentic Bob Ross paintings were still shockingly hard to find on the public art market. Prices typically reached the thousands of dollars and often exceeded $10,000 when pieces came up for sale. Years before the television program debuted, Bob's paintings provided the majority of the paintings that collectors could purchase. Music. Many of the paintings created throughout the series were still owned by Bob Ross Incorporated because Bob himself was against using his paintings as financial investment vehicles. One early exception was the first painting made just for television, A Walk in the Woods, was sold through a pledge campaign soon after the premiere of the first season. The artwork eventually made its way into the possession of art dealer Ryan Nelson, who put it up for sale for about $10 million. Even as values increased, Bob's art gained more popularity among common people who had a personal connection to the man they watched paint at home, as opposed to luxury collectors or music. A public legacy and an expanding cultural symbol. Bob Ross remained dedicated to the basic goal of making painting accessible even as Bob Ross Incorporated began to broaden its scope through training initiatives and equipment sales. He kept his performance straightforward and educational. He encouraged novices to have faith in themselves, reduced painting down into manageable steps, and placed no strict requirements on ability levels. He remained the same way. He never lost his cool, talked softly, and taught without passing judgment. He always worked live, going from a blank canvas of music to a completed scenario in less than 30 minutes. As the show expanded to new audiences, the bond between viewers and him deepened. Bob was introduced to audiences across the globe through international broadcasts. People looked to his serene presence for solace at home during extended periods of worldwide lockdown in the UK, and the BBC aired episodes repeatedly. In the meantime, the firm kept a sizable collection of the show's original artwork. Although Bob Ross's early works were the only ones that were widely circulated, this trend created a distinct market where the value of a painting by Ross was determined by emotional connection rather than celebrity or opulence. His work was later defined by art appraisal firms as existing between fine art and entertainment memorabilia, which explains why the majority of demand was driven by ordinary fans rather than music, affluent elite collectors. Bob was no longer merely a television instructor by this point. He has gained international recognition as a symbol of serene creativity. His gentle encouragement, steady brushwork, and sweet voice were known to millions. The straightforward method that creates the magic. Bob Ross used the wet-on-wet oil painting technique. In other words, he applied paint straight onto a thin coating of wet base paint. Nothing had to dry first. Each painting was completed quickly thanks to this technique. Ross made the tools easy to use. Beginners didn't have to spend much money because he only used a few brushes and colors. Large 1- and 2-inch brushes and painting knives were his primary instruments. These facilitated the rapid shaping of mountains, clouds, music, and trees. Ross frequently suggested odorless paint thinner to spectators as a way to clean his brushes. Entire landscape sceneries were created in less than 30 minutes because to the wet-on-wet technique, gentle brushstrokes, and straightforward color selections. Ross really made 3 copies of each painting that was televised. The first was completed before to filming and used music as a guide while off camera. While painting the second version during the program that fans observed being created live, he adhered to that. He painted a third, more intricate version for his instruction, music, books after recording. On the side or back, each one had a unique mark. The initial one was called Kowalski. TV was featured in the show version, and the book painting was labeled Book. These behind-the-scenes copies demonstrated how meticulously planned the Serenity was. Every episode was subtly backed by preparation that spectators never saw, even though the paintings appeared impromptu on TV. And one individual, who influenced Ross more than anyone else, was largely responsible for that preparation. Bill Alexander and the tense relationship. Bob Ross was always upfront about the source of his foundation. He honored Bill Alexander, the artist who taught him the wet-on-wet method, in the opening episode of the second season of The Joy of Painting. With genuine thanks, Ross remarked, "Years ago, Bill taught me this fantastic technique, and I feel as though he gave me a precious gift, and I'd like to share that gift with you." However, as Ross gained popularity, the relationship shifted. The move was not something Alexander took lightly. The conflict between the teacher and the pupil was made public when he told the New York Times in 1991, "He betrayed me. I invented wet music on wet. I trained him and he thinks he can do it better." Art historians, however, noticed something more significant. Both men were far before the wet-on-wet fashion. Frans Hals, Diego Velázquez, Caravaggio, Paul Cézanne, John Everett Mill, John Singer Sargent, and Claude Monet were among the famous painters who employed the technique, which originated in Flanders in the 15th century. Their quarrel was placed in a broader context by this history. No single artist was the sole owner of the method. Music, it was handed down over the ages. Still, Ross was always careful to give Alexander public credit. Ross focused on teaching while others argued over the origins. Viewers began to recall not only his landscape paintings but also his distinct style and catchphrases as his fame grew and his speech, attire, and behavior became as identifiable as his brushstrokes. The moments, appearance, and voice that fans recall. In addition to his painting skills, Bob Ross gained notoriety for his conversational style. In almost every episode, he demonstrated how much he loved cleaning his brushes by repeating music, nice remarks that fans still use today, like, "Let's add some happy little trees." He would dip them into odorless thinner, then shake off the liquid by hitting the brush against a garbage pail or box. He would occasionally slap the can hard, chuckle, and smile while claiming that he enjoyed beating the living daylights out of it. Every now and then he tapped the brush against the easel and added a playful "hit the bucket." To prevent studio lights from reflecting off the palette's surface as Ross worked, he also employed a lightly sanded palette. He wore pants and a simple light-colored shirt every day. He thought this understated style would always seem classic. Throughout the performance, he talked softly and slowly, music, as though addressing a single audience member instead of a large gathering. Music, when asked why everything in his painted world seemed so peaceful, he explained, "I got a letter from somebody here a while back, and they said, 'Bob, everything in your world seems to be happy.' That's for sure. That's why I paint. It's because I can create the kind of world that I want, and I can make this world as happy as I want it. Shoot, if you want bad stuff, watch the news." His landscapes usually showed scenes inspired by Alaska, where he had once been stationed, music, in the Air Force. Mountains, snow, lakes, forests. Sometimes a quiet log cabin would appear, often without smoke from the chimney and seemingly empty. Ross rarely painted people or signs of daily human life. Instead, he often mentioned animals that could exist in the landscapes, a cow in a barn or birds in the trees, and encouraged viewers to imagine stories for the scenes in their own minds. One of his most famous sayings summed up his teaching style: "We don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents." Research later found patterns in his paintings. An analysis of 381 episodes showed that 91% included at least one tree, 44% had clouds, 39% included mountains, and 34% showed mountain lakes. By Ross' own estimate, he completed more than 30,000 paintings in total. But his calming presence soon spilled beyond his canvas, leading to public appearances that surprised many fans. Stepping beyond the canvas, Bob Ross enjoyed country music and found himself invited onto the stage at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville in 1987 by Hank Snow. When the audience saw him, they gave him a massive ovation. Ross admitted he felt nervous at first, but relaxed after he cracked a joke to the crowd. Later, Snow even received a private painting lesson from him. Ross also traveled to New York City several times to promote his book, The Best of the Joy of Painting, with Bob Ross, music, and to demonstrate painting techniques in front of live audiences. During one visit in 1989, he appeared on the Joan Rivers Show. In 1992, he returned for a live broadcast with Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee Ford. In 1994, Ross appeared on The Phil Donahue Show. During that episode, he brought 5 audience members on stage to paint alongside him. Donahue even joined in and painted himself. In the early 1990s, Ross recorded several promotional spots for MTV. According to American City Business Journals, these ads connected well with Generation X and their growing interest in ironic and retro culture. One of Ross' final public appearances came in 1995 as a guest on the pilot episode of the children's series, The Adventures of Elmer and Friends. The series aired in 1996 and included a final message of thanks from Ross along with a musical tribute, a quiet moment that reminded viewers of how deeply his calm painting, style had reached into popular culture long after the brush strokes were finished. Family, marriage, and a very private life. Bob Ross lived a much more private life than fans ever realized. He married 3 times and had 2 children. His first child came from a relationship he had when he was a teenager. Later, with his first wife, Vivian Ridge, he had a son named Robert Stephen Ross. Steve followed closely in his father's footsteps and became a talented painter himself. He even appeared on The Joy of Painting from time to time and became a Ross certified instructor. Steve's most memorable on-screen moment came during the final episode of Season 1. In that episode, he read letters from viewers filled with how-to questions. Bob answered each question while painting live, working through each technique step by step until the full painting was complete. Despite these family moments on TV, Bob's marriage to Vivian ended in divorce in 1977, reportedly due to his infidelity. Bob later married Jane, but the couple did not have children together. In 1992, Jane died from cancer. Just 3 years later, Bob married for the 3rd time to Linda Brown only 2 months before his own death. Even with marriages, growing children, and fame, Bob stayed very guarded about his personal life. He avoided public interviews whenever possible and valued privacy deeply. Very few insights into his off-camera world exist, and much of what is known comes only from select interviews in the PBS documentary Bob Ross, The Happy Painter. Bob Ross Incorporated has continued to be extremely protective of both his image and private details. While millions felt they knew him through television, Bob kept his real life carefully shielded. Spiritually, Bob did not belong to any organized religion. He did believe in a creator God and often ended his episodes with the simple blessing, "God bless." Though he became a comforting figure to strangers around the world, he kept emotional distance from the spotlight. A choice that would later contrast sharply with what happened once his life unexpectedly came to an end. Illness, quiet passing, and business fallout. Bob Ross smoked cigarettes, for most of his adult life and dealt with ongoing health problems. He believed he would probably die young. Years before his passing, he was diagnosed with lymphoma. Bob never shared this news publicly. Only close friends and family knew the truth. Outside that small circle, no one was aware of how serious his condition was. Even while sick, Bob kept working. At the time of his death, he had already prepared 7 paintings intended for what would have been the 32nd season of The Joy of Painting. Bob passed away at the age of 52 on July 4, 1995 in Orlando, Florida due to complications from lymphoma. He was later laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Gotha, Florida beneath a plaque reading Bob Ross, television artist. His diagnosis became public only after he had died. His passing also triggered immediate business consequences. Under the original setup of Bob Ross Incorporated, the death of any partner meant that person's company ownership would be split evenly between the remaining partners. With Bob's death and the earlier death of his wife, Jane, the second partner, the Kowalski family became sole owners of the company. Their interest focused mainly on using Bob Ross's name for painting supply sales. Conflict followed quickly. According to reports, the Kowalskis acted aggressively toward members of Bob's family and his associates, allegedly attempting to pressure Bob while he was ill to sign over rights to his estate before his death. However, Bob rewrote his will before passing. He removed the Kowalskis entirely and left his estate, including rights to his name and likeness, to his son Steve and, his half-brother Jimmy Cox. The Kowalskis challenged the will, arguing, that nearly all of Bob's work qualified as work for hire, meaning the rights legally belonged to the company rather than Bob himself. A lawsuit followed and eventually the Kowalskis succeeded, winning legal control of Bob Ross's name and business interests, reshaping control of his legacy almost overnight. Business expansion and ongoing disputes. After Annette and Walt Kowalski later retired from running the company, their daughter Joan Kowalski took over Bob Ross Incorporated. Under her leadership, the brand expanded far beyond painting supplies. Merchandise tied to Bob's image entered the mass market throughout the 2000s. Joan Kowalski also negotiated a settlement with Steve Ross and Jimmy Cox. The agreement granted Bob Ross Incorporated permanent rights to Bob's name and likeness. In return, Steve Ross would be allowed to continue his own painting career publicly without fear of legal action, something Steve said had largely stopped him from painting for years after his father's death. Joan Kowalski also organized a revival of The Joy of Painting. The new project used the paintings Bob had prepared for the planned season 32. Nicholas Hankins, a certified Bob Ross instructor, served as the host for the revival series. While business expanded and legal matters settled formally, questions about the handling of Bob's legacy continued to linger among fans. Meanwhile, Bob's image began to pop up everywhere outside of formal painting circles. Cosplayers dressed as Bob Ross at fan events like New York Comic Con. Street artists painted murals of him in cities such as Ankara, Turkey. His likeness appeared in television shows, movies, and video games, including Family Guy, The Boondocks, Deadpool 2, and Smite. In 2012, Google honored him on what would have been his 70th birthday with a Google Doodle showing Bob painting a landscape that formed the letter G. A board game titled Bob Ross, The Art of Chill hit Target shelves. A Bob Ross Chia pet was released. Plans once existed to create Bob Ross video games for the Wii, Nintendo DS, and PC, but those projects were cancelled before release. His face had turned into both a cultural tribute and a commercial icon, leading into a new era that surprised even the very people managing his brand. Digital revival and museum recognition. In 2015, Bob Ross saw a major comeback thanks to Twitch Creative. The platform aired a 9-day marathon of The Joy of Painting starting October 29, marking what would have been his 73rd birthday. The response was massive. Twitch reported 5.6 million viewers tuned in. Because of its success, the show began airing weekly with one full season rebroadcast every Monday. A portion of the ad money was pledged to charities, including St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Interest kept growing. In June 2016, Netflix added Beauty is Everywhere to its lineup. These episodes came from seasons 20, 21, and 22, of the original series. The sudden surge surprised the Kowalskis, who were managing Bob's brand rights at the time. In response, they launched an official Bob Ross YouTube channel, which gained more than 1 million subscribers in its first year. Soon after, Music, a 24-hour fast network called the Bob Ross Channel, was created. It streams reruns non-stop on platforms including the Roku channel, DirecTV Stream, and Peacock. At the same time, Bob Ross continued to reach new audiences across pop culture. In 2020, Magic, Music, The Gathering released limited trading cards featuring Bob Ross artwork. In 2021, Netflix, Music, released the documentary Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed, which examined, Music, his life and the disputes surrounding who controls his legacy. That same year, a children's biography titled This Is Your World, The Story of Bob Ross was published, written by Sophia Goltz and illustrated by Robin Dunn. In 2023, actor Owen Wilson portrayed a fictional character inspired by Bob Ross in the film Paint. Decades after Bob's passing, Music, his calm voice and gentle style remained deeply rooted in popular culture, and renewed attention soon led fans to ask one big question that had gone unanswered for years. Where were all his original paintings? Where did all the Bob Ross paintings go? Bob Ross painted an incredible number of works, yet very few appear in auctions or museums. That mystery was, Music, finally answered in a 2019 investigation by the New York Times. During the filming of The Joy of Painting, Bob painted 3 versions of every scene. He created, Music, one painting before filming as a reference, another live during the episode for viewers to watch, and a third afterward for his how-to books. With 403 episodes, this resulted in more than 1,000 paintings made for the show alone. Yet, instead of being shown or sold, most of these originals were quietly stored away. The investigation revealed they are kept at Bob Ross Incorporated headquarters in Northern Virginia. The paintings are boxed, Music, up and placed in a regular storage room alongside company papers and personal items. They are not held in climate-controlled art storage and the building is closed to the public, meaning fans cannot view the artwork there. None of the paintings stored by Bob Ross Incorporated, Music, are for sale, which also means many so-called Bob Ross originals seen online are likely not authentic. Some real paintings have reached the public in limited ways. In early 2019, Bob Ross Incorporated donated a small selection of items to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. These included the paintings on A Clear Day in Blue Ridge Falls along with notebooks and fan letters. While the paintings entered the museum's collection, they were not immediately displayed. Later that year, a special exhibition at the Franklin Park Arts Center in Purcellville, Virginia, displayed 24 genuine Bob Ross paintings, the largest public showing of his work ever held. The discovery of where the paintings were kept solved a long-gunning mystery, but also fed into ongoing discussion about Bob's legacy. Music, this conversation intensified with the release of Netflix's Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed in 2021, which focused on legal disputes over the rights to Bob's name and artwork. Bob Ross Incorporated pushed back, calling the documentary inaccurate and heavily, Music, slanted and accusing its producers of bias. The company emphasized that the film correctly honored Bob's talent and gentle spirit, but unfairly portrayed the current owners, Walt and Annette Kowalski, longtime business partners who co-founded Bob Ross Incorporated in 1984 alongside Bob and his wife Jane, and later gained full control of the company after both Bob and Jane's deaths. The film claimed rights to Bob's name and likeness were taken from his son, Steve Ross, through aggressive legal pressure. A version of events the company strongly disputes, leaving fans caught between the peaceful image of the painter they loved and the complicated business battles that followed his fame. Do you think Bob Ross paintings should be shared with the public more or kept protected where they are? Share your thoughts in the comments, Music, below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating music history. See you next time.